This video continues to discuss functions. Specifically, we're going to look at determining if a graph meets the definition of a function. Recall the definition of a function? That means any relationship between two variables where each of the inputs, x values, can be assigned only one output value. If any of the x values or inputs produce more than one y value or more than one output, then we know the relationship is not a function. Graphs are one way we have to display the data about relationships between two variables, and they may be the most challenging way to have to tell if something's a function or not. We can get help with graphs by using the vertical line test. It's a nice test to help us see if all of the inputs are assigned exactly one output. We do this by drawing vertical lines, that means lines that go straight up and down onto the graph. Those vertical lines help us identify the number of outputs assigned to each of the inputs. Each vertical line is going to show us all the possible output values for that one given input. And so if it's a function, each vertical line should cross our graph only once, because each of the inputs should only get one output. But if it's not a function, some of the vertical lines will intersect with or cross our graph multiple times because some of the inputs are going to be receiving more than one output, which is the reason it's not a function. Let's look at some examples. This question asked which graph does not represent a function, and there were 4 graphs provided to students. I have drawn in blue dotted lines here that are vertical lines to help us see which graphs are functions, which pass the vertical line test, and which graphs are not functions, which ones fail the vertical line test. If I look at graph A, I see this vertical line that goes through an x value of -2 only hits the graph once. That means when x is -2, relationship A only has one possible output, a y value of 3. Same thing if the x value were +2, the only output for this graph here is where the blue line hits that graph, a y value of 3 when x is +2. So this relationship could be a function because each vertical line is only hitting this graph once, showing one output for each input. When we look at relationship B, the graph is curving. It's a nonlinear graph. That's something that's new, but it's still a function because each blue line hits the graph only once. When we look to relationship C, some of the vertical lines hit the graph only once. When x is equal to -3 over here, there's only one possible output, a y value of 3. But if x were equal to 1, this blue vertical line here, we see 2 possible outputs. We don't know if y will be +1 or -1. Because of that, relationship C is the one that is not a function. It's the answer that would be selecting for this question. We want to make sure that relationship D is a function, and we see that for this one, the blue lines only hit this graph once each time. So that tells us relationship D passes the vertical line test. It is also a function.